People marry for all kinds of reasons. Some do it for power, some for land, some for money, and some because the thought of growing old alone feels like standing at the edge of a canyon with no bridge in sight. But when Daniel Mercer married Evelyn Hart, it was for love. Stubborn, gentle, steadfast love. The kind that kept him out of the whiskey dens and card rooms where other men tried to gamble their way out of the lives they'd built. Daniel was not a perfect man, but he was a devoted one. When he gave a vow, it stayed given. The Montana Territory did not care about vows. It cared about wind and ice and hunger and the way a winter night could pry at a man's bones. In the spring of 1879, snow still clung like stubborn lace to the ridgelines, and the wind scraped the ranch house as if trying to get in. Inside, Evelyn lay in their bed, her body spent from the damage childbirth had done a year before. No one in town had the right words for it. Now it would be called uterine prolapse. Then it was called suffering. She fought it bravely, the way she fought everything, with a soft voice and a steady gaze, but she knew the hour that had come for her. Their daughter, Rose, barely a year old, had never spoken a word. The silence itself became a presence in that house, as constant as the ticking of the mantel clock. On a gray afternoon swollen with the smell of thawing earth, Evelyn drew Daniel's hand to her lips. The skin at her mouth felt fever-warm. "Promise me," she whispered, "when I'm gone, marry Amelia Price." Daniel flinched as if struck. Amelia Price ran the only respectable saloon within 50 miles, a place that kept its lamps trimmed and its mirrors polished even when every road into town turned to ruts and soup. Respectable as it was, the church ladies still spoke of it as if it were a damp cellar where rot is born. Amelia was a widow. She had a mind like a steel trap, and a patience that could cool a fistfight at 20 paces. But to marry her? Daniel shook his head. "Evelyn. She'll love Rose," Evelyn said. "She'll protect her when the world grows cruel. I know it." He wanted to argue that the world could be made gentle by a father's hands. He wanted to say he would learn how to braid a little girl's hair and make a house tidy enough to make her feel safe. But he saw that steady gaze. He heard the clock. He remembered that love sometimes requires a man to carry what he never thought he could lift. "I promise," he said. "If you were sitting by that bed, what would you have said to her? Tell me in the comments. And if frontier stories with full hearts and hard choices are your kind of trail, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow's tale turns on a single decision at high noon. After the funeral, the days lost their edges. Dawn was a smear of gray and cattle breath. Night was a narrow path between chores and Rose's uneven sleep. The child did not coo or babble. She stared sometimes as if she could hear a music too fine for human ears. Daniel sang to her anyway, songs he remembered from riverboats and songs he made up on the spot. The neighbors brought pies and advice and left with clean plates and empty words. "You'll figure it out," they said, meaning they hoped he would do it far from their doorsteps. October bit hard that year. One night, frost turned the pasture white and Rose's cough sharpened into something that sounded like a blade striking an anvil. Daniel wrapped her in his coat and rode for the doctor. The office was dark. A man passing with his collar turned up against the wind said, "Doc took his nightcap at Amelia's. Try the saloon." Daniel had not been inside that room since he married. He braced himself for the smell and the talk and the mirrors that always made a man look like a stranger. He pushed through the doors. The first thing that struck him was the heat from the stove. The second was the quiet curve of Amelia Price's voice cutting clean across the hum. Daniel Mercer. She did not rush to him. She did not make a show. She stepped out from behind the bar, her auburn hair tied back, her dress plain and neat. She looked only at the child. "May I?" He handed Rose to her, not because the town approved of it, but because the child's breath was the only approval that mattered. "Sit by the stove," Amelia said. "Slow sips." She coaxed broth into Rose's mouth with a sweetness that made Daniel's throat ache. He had spent months trying to do right. He'd forgotten that gentleness could work more quickly than force. Rose slept easier that night, and Daniel did not know what to do with that relief. So he came back the next day to thank Amelia. He came the day after that because thanking her felt incomplete. In the weeks that followed, he found himself in the saloon, not for whiskey, but for the quiet sound of people forgetting their troubles for an hour. He stood near the wall and listened. Sometimes Amelia sent a plate to his corner. Sometimes she rode out to the ranch with bread that needed eating before it went stale, or mended shirts that had magically found their way into her basket. They spoke on the porch about cattle prices and snowpack and how the creek sounded at night. He noticed the quick intelligence in her eyes. She noticed the way his hands moved around a child without noise or fuss. One night, after supper at the ranch, they washed and dried the same dish at the same moment, and their fingers touched, briefly, astonished. The kiss rose naturally from that surprise. It was not a kiss that asked permission to exist. It was one that understood permission had long since been granted. In the morning, Amelia was gone, not because she had changed her mind, but because she believed he would. Men took, men repented, men retreated to their reputations. She misjudged this man. Montana has a way of hurrying news. By the end of the week, a woman at the post office had asked Daniel if he preferred the saloon's stew to church potluck. A rancher leaned on the boardwalk rail and said, "Careful, Mercer. That widow knows a thing or two about making a man forget himself." The pastor's wife smiled sadly and said she was praying for his daughter's soul. He kept his temper like he kept his fences, tight enough to hold. Trouble arrived on its own schedule, as it always does. A ranch hand named Vernon Pike, sodden with whiskey and daylight, grabbed a young server by the wrist in Amelia's saloon and tried to pull her toward the back. Amelia set her voice like a plumb line. Let her go. Pike laughed and asked what kind of church she imagined she ran. Daniel stepped forward and told Pike that he was making it his business. There are men who telegraph a punch like they telegraph their intentions to leave a town. Pike was one. Daniel slipped aside, drove his fist into the hinge of the man's jaw, and put him on the floor. The room held its breath. Daniel turned to Amelia. "They call you immoral," he said, so everyone could hear him. "I have seen your heart. I aim to make you my wife." It is a strange thing to throw a rope around your reputation in front of the entire town and pull it toward the person you want. For a long second, the room did not blink. Then chairs creaked and someone laughed because he was relieved not to be the one required to respond. Amelia searched Daniel's face as if expecting the mask to slip. When it did not, she nodded once. Later, when the ink had dried at the courthouse, she told him she had not been waiting for rescue. She had been waiting to be treated as if rescue were not the point. "If you're still with me, tell me this. Would you have said those words in a room full of people who wanted you to bite them back?" Drop your answer below. If these frontier reckonings get your heart pacing, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Marriage hardened into work and softened into home. Amelia kept the saloon's ledgers turning like clockwork and brought order to the ranch without drawing attention to the fact that this was what she was doing. Curtains appeared in the windows. Bread rose reliably. The vegetable garden crept back from neglect as if waking from a long doze. Rose watched all of it, kept her distance for a week, then slipped a small hand into Amelia's skirt fold and stayed there. Winter refitted the land with its usual sharpness. In January, a stranger who introduced himself as Evan Gray asked after Daniel at the general store and at the stable, and finally at the ranch gate. He looked clean and competent and carried his confidence like a man carries a letter of credit, always reachable. He said he had known Evelyn. He said the girl might not be Daniel's. He had papers, he said, letters. Proofs. Daniel's first impulse was to break the man's nose and worry about his hands later. Amelia rested a palm on his sleeve and asked Gray to show the papers. The handwriting did not match the shape of Evelyn's hand. The ink on two of the letters had not fully settled. Amelia smoothed the ribbon that tied them. "If you intend to fool this town," she said, "choose a ribbon that a practical woman would use." Evelyn tucked her notes into cookbooks. She did not tie her thoughts in silk. Gray smiled a lawyer's smile and suggested the sheriff settle the question. Amelia said the sheriff would gladly do so. That night, as wind worried the eaves, Amelia told Daniel she believed the stranger had come for land, not for blood. Men who want children usually arrive with toys. Men who want acreage arrive with folded paper. "We will not be the only ones he tries," she said. They were not. By week's end, Gray had been to 3 ranches in 2 counties and had accepted a cool cup of coffee at each. When he came back to the Mercers with a sharper tone, the sheriff met him at the gate and asked who had sold him the fiction he was peddling. Gray's confidence cracked. You cannot hold a lie up to the light forever and expect not to be blinded by it. In March, with the snow still a rumor on the high ridges, Amelia pressed a hand to her belly and looked at Daniel with a private astonishment. The child she carried was not a replacement for any grief that had gone before. It was a new story entirely. Some nights Daniel woke sweating from the memory of Evelyn's struggle. Those nights Amelia took his hand and placed it on the calm rise of her stomach and told him that fear is an honest visitor. They invited it to sit in the kitchen, and then they sent it on its way. When the time came, Doc Avery and Mrs. Peake, who had midwifed half the county, moved in that small room like a pair of practiced sailors working at tight deck in heavy weather. Daniel chopped wood he did not need. He counted the seconds between Amelia's breaths because he needed numbers. The cry arrived. It was healthy and furious, the sound a brand makes when it bites clean. They named him Raymond. Daniel touched the boy's cheek with the tip of one finger and felt something settle in him with the authority of a signature. Spring rewrote the ranch. Days found their heat and purpose. Evenings found their pattern. Amelia reading by lamplight, Daniel polishing tack, the baby learning his right to be here. Rose remained silent, but kinder in her quiet. She fetched blankets without being asked and stood beside the crib like a sentinel who enjoys the work. Men who did not love Amelia still feared her competence. That is nearly as useful. 3 bounty riders tried strong-arming the saloon one evening, the sort of men who imagine the law moves slower than fire. They turned over a lamp. Flames raced across sawdust. Daniel entered with his rifle like a man carrying the last word anyone wanted to hear. The sheriff arrived so quickly you'd think Amelia had rung a bell no one could hear, but everyone obeyed. The arrests were neat. The lesson was cleaner. Daniel told the room that if any man wanted to speak on his wife's character, he should do so after he made sure his own would stand daylight. From that night, the town's appetite for talk waned. It is one thing to whisper, it is another to be heard. Summer came like a quilt turned warm side down. The creek ran clear as glass. Grass wove the pastures into a soft sea. The babies swatted at sunlight like it was something a pair of small hands could catch. Rose learned the names of plants by watching Amelia's mouth shape them. She still did not speak. It was all right, Daniel told himself. Not every river needs to be noisy to run deep. The mind finds a path through quiet when it needs one. On a noon heavy with bees and the sound of water on stone, Amelia cut bread thick and put out slices of cold beef on a plate, then stepped to the doorway. The yard lay in a heat shimmer. Raymond waddled with the stubborn authority of a boy who has learned that gravity is a flaw he can outwit. Rose paced him, pointing, a lizard on the fence rail, blue flax in a cluster by the gate, cloud sheep grazing slow along the ridge. "This is called a flower," Rose said. The air inside the house moved with the words. Amelia felt her knees go out from under her and hit the step before she knew she'd fallen. She braced a hand against the door frame and covered her mouth with the other. The child looked back as if she had committed a crime. "We love our mama," Rose said. She did not whisper it. She gave it without ceremony, like a fact the world had missed. The boy flapped at the air and laughed. Amelia extended her arms and the children came as if pulled by a rope that belonged to no person living. Daniel had only heard the last of it from the doorway. But it planted something solid in his chest. He did not speak because he was not sure he could. Rose turned her face up to him. "Is Papa happy?" "Papa is the happiest man in Montana," he said, and if his voice broke, the child forgave him for it. That afternoon lasted a long time. Sun spilled onto the table and set the bread glowing. Dust motes floated like newly named stars. The house settled into a new shape and kept that shape. If you felt a moment like that, when the world arranges itself around a sentence you were not sure you would ever hear, tell me about it. Your story will help someone else hold on. Peace on the frontier is not a permanent crop. It must be replanted every season. In August, heat ripened a drought into something close to danger. Water ran slow, grass went sharp and brittle underfoot. Daniel made a hard choice and moved cattle along the creek banks at night to save what was left of the pasture. One evening he did not return on time, and Amelia felt the old worry knock. She set a lamp in the window. She trimmed the wick. She forced hunger into the pantry and closed the door on it. He came back at midnight with dust baked into his skin and 3 head less than he'd left with. Coyotes or men, it hardly mattered which. Loss is loss. She wiped his face clean and handed him water and did not tell him it would be all right. She told him he had done enough for one day. Sometimes that is the more truthful comfort. By September, the drought broke with violence. Rain hit the land like it meant to make up for time lost. The creek rose fast and mean. A steer went down in it and Daniel went in after, because that is what a man does when the math of his living depends on muscle and rope and refusal to let go. He came out bruised and grinning, and Amelia felt anger at him in the pure way a person feels anger when they love someone enough to be terrified of the thing that gives him pride. She told him, and he nodded and said he would try to be more careful. He was careful for 3 days. Then he was himself again. In October, the town held a harvest supper behind the church. For the first time since the courthouse, Amelia crossed that yard on Daniel's arm without feeling like a target pinned to a hay bale. The pastor's wife brought a bowl to their table and spoke to Rose in a voice that did not try to be tenderer than children know how to bear. Rose said thank you with her hands and then, slowly, as if testing a board on a bridge, said it aloud. The woman looked up sharply and then smiled in a way that made Amelia lay down a piece of weight she'd been carrying for too long. Winter returned, as it always does. Snow smoothed edges. Sound dropped. Nights gathered early. Amelia taught Rose to read by the fire, tracing letters with the tip of a knitting needle on the back of an old ledger page. Daniel taught Raymond that a hammer is not a toy, and also not a threat if a person learns where to set his fingers. On long evenings, they told true stories dressed in just enough polish to make them sound like legends. They said the child's names as if the names themselves were stove heat. In January, Gray passed through again, shabbier at the cuffs. He kept to the far side of the street from the saloon. He did not ride out to the ranch. Some men learn. Some learn too late. Either way, time keeps its own ledger. In March, a blizzard arrived so quickly the sky did not have a chance to warn. Daniel went for the barn in a white wall and did not come back when he should have. Amelia wrapped herself tight and pushed out the door with a rope around her waist, the other end tied to the post. She found him 10 yards from the threshold, disoriented in the white noise, laughing at his own foolishness in a way that told her he understood how narrow the pass had been. She hauled him in with the stubborn strength of a person who refuses to narrate tragedy when a correction will do. When the world settled again, when the thaw came, when mud seized the wheels and then released them, when the first calves bawled and the first wildflowers opened like small shocking notes of forgiveness, Amelia took Rose by the hand and walked the fence line all the way to the creek. The child did not speak much on that walk, but she did not need to. The sound of a girl breathing contentedly beside her was a kind of speech. On the way back, Rose said, "I used to think silence was safer." Amelia said, "Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is simply heavy." They let the air decide which day it was. By summer, the saloon had become what Amelia intended it to be at the beginning. A place where men could sit without facing a mirror they despised. She kept a bucket of sand by the bar because one lesson learned hard does not leave a mind quickly. She kept a short shotgun under the shelf and did not apologize for it. Trouble glanced in from time to time and kept moving. The ranch found its summer rhythm again. Creak of the windmill, water in the trough, a gelding with opinions, fence staples that go missing until a person is no longer looking for them. Daniel's laugh lived closer to the surface. Raymond learned the names of tools and mispronounced them in a way that made even the old hands smile. Rose found a friend at the schoolhouse who liked books the way she did, and the two of them sat on the back steps every Thursday, trading paragraphs from the same page, as if a story is sweeter when it is shared at the same speed. One night in July, Amelia woke to a thin cry that was not the baby. She went to the porch and found Rose there, bare feet on warm boards, eyes wide with the kind of fear that does not have a cause you can point at. Amelia did not talk. She sat. After a while, Rose said, "What if words leave again?" Amelia said, "Then you will wait with me until they come back." They waited. Night filled in the spaces between the cottonwood leaves, and a coyote stitched a thread of sound across the dark like a seam holding two pieces of cloth. Later that month, Daniel took Rose into town, just the two of them. He bought her a paper fan with painted cranes on it and then sat with her in the schoolyard and learned from her how birds hop and why they look so surprised at their own shadows. On the way home, he told her that a father cannot armor a child against the whole world, but he can teach the child how to stand behind a solid tree when the wind goes hard. She nodded solemnly and then asked if he would show her how to set a post straight tomorrow. He said he would. By the time September made a gold river out of afternoon light, the town had come around in the simple, practical way of frontier towns that cannot afford to keep their foolishness polished. The woman at the post office asked after the children by name. The pastor's wife occasionally stopped by the saloon at midday for a lemonade and a quiet word that had nothing to do with saving anyone's soul. The ranchers who had once measured Daniel's choices with their eyebrows now borrowed his branding irons without asking if borrowing implied approval. On an evening when the sky looked like a tablecloth laid for a feast, Daniel and Amelia walked the path behind the house. The creek spoke its easy syllables. The children ran ahead and then circled back and then ran ahead again as children do. "I used to think," Daniel said, "that love was a thing you chose once. You spoke it, and it became a wall that kept the world out." He shook his head. "It isn't a wall. It's a gate. You open it 100 times a day, and sometimes in the night, and every time you do, you hope you are letting in the right weather." Amelia said, "Even a storm waters the ground." He laughed. "You always were better at finishing my thoughts than I was. If this story earned your time, let me know below which moment you felt most. Daniel's declaration in the saloon, Rose's first words in the yard, or Amelia hauling a stubborn man through a whiteout by a rope. Your comments help me pick what to tell next. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's ride." They returned to the house together. The last light sat soft on the table, turning the bread heel into something almost holy. Rose reached for Amelia's hand without looking, sure of where it would be. Raymond announced that he was taller than the dog, and the dog looked offended in a way that made everyone grin. Daniel closed the door and felt the click of the latch like a blessing. Outside, the land went on being harsh and generous. Inside, the family went on being whole. Whole things are hard to break.